Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5. In this video, I'll review Season 5 of Star Trek Lower Decks as a whole. So I have to start with the spoiler warning for Lower Decks up to all of Season 5, up to the very end of Season 5. If you have not seen all of Season 5, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, yes, very sad this is the last season. I am very sad about that. But it is what it is. But what's also very clear is that this was not intended to be the last season. That they had already made, or they were working on the final season when they heard that the show got canceled. I think the season might have been different. For example, I think towards the end, or like the middle of the season, they're introducing characters which I get the feeling they expected them to be around for longer. So, and there is the infamous thing that I feel like everyone's talked about to death that I don't even need to mention it anymore. But the fact that the episode 8 and 9 both didn't focus on our main characters, and then so this is 2 episodes leading up to the end of the entire show, so a lot of people were very much against that, but you know, again, that is what it is. I do feel like, so it's similar to Discovery, but Discovery, from what I understand, had already wrapped filming when they heard they were getting canceled, so then they gave them more time so they could do reshoots and add in an extra scene. From my understanding, they were in the middle of, for Lower Decks, they were in the middle of working on the final batch of episodes when they heard they were getting canceled. So it's unlike Discovery where they were already done, they had to go back and add more. They were in the midst of creating it, so it would have been easier for them to add in an extra scene. And you can kind of tell in the final episode where the final scene is added in to wrap up the show, because I do get the sense in that final episode that, again, it wasn't intended as a series finale, it was intended as a season finale, but then the adding in some extra bits at the end, and it fits in a lot more smoothly than the Discovery's final ending did. That scene, that was very obviously tacked on, whereas here you can kind of see the seams, but it fits into it. Doesn't feel out of place in the episode at all, and it fits into the episode a lot better. So my overall thoughts on the season, though, is that it's a decent season of Lower Decks, but not the best. I think it's more consistent than previous seasons, because there were previous seasons that had 1 or 2 really bad episodes, but then a couple of really great episodes. Where this season, it didn't have episodes as great as previous seasons, but it also didn't have episodes as bad as previous seasons. It was pretty consistent, like, oh yeah, this is a good, solid Lower Decks episode. Kind of not great, but it's funny and it hits all the beats, so that's what most of the episodes of the season were like. Being that as it is, I think that it is not one of the better seasons of the show. I would probably... See, it's been a long time since I've seen the previous seasons, so I don't know if I could really rank them. But from memory, I would say this is... that season 1 would be the least favorite, and this would probably be right after that. Either that, or maybe season 2 would be around. Maybe it would be right around season 2. It's hard to say. I would have to watch season 2 again. But I remember season 2 having some really great episodes at the end, which I don't believe this season really did. I mean, maybe. So yeah, in the grand scheme of things, when I look at the fact Lower Decks is canceled, part of me, the more cynical part of me, is thinking, well, maybe this was for the better. Maybe it was as good to go out on a high note that maybe it just would have just started going downhill from here, because maybe they pretty much did pretty much everything that they could do and they'd just be retreading ground, because this season was a downgrade. I'm sorry, but I really believe that it was a downgrade, particularly from the previous two seasons, season 3 and 4, which were far superior. And so I'm kind of thinking, yeah, maybe it's not such a bad thing that that Lower Decks went out on a high note before it started to downslip even more. Now, that's just speculation. Who knows what a season 6 or 7 could have brung? Maybe they actually could have got the quality back up, but we don't have to take that risk now that it would end in 2 bad seasons. But I will say, because as I was going through and reviewing episode by episode, I gave, episode 7, Fully Dilated, a 9 out of 10. If I was going to look at that again, I would actually up that to a 10 and call that was my favorite episode of the season. Fully Dilated, I think, because it was kind of a sleeper episode. Like, the first time I watched it, I didn't recognize greatness immediately, but that does happen with a lot of great episodes. That does take me a couple watches to sort of realize, like, the longer it sat with me and the more that I thought about it, I thought that it was a really strong character episode for Tindy and T'Lyn, and Mariner was fucking hilarious, and the bits with Boimler and Rutherford spilling the drinks on the transporter pad was also funny. So, and plus we get a Brent Spiner cameo as Data, so it was kind of firing on all cylinders, and I think it brings what I love best about Lower Decks, is that a good, quiet character drama while being completely hilarious at the same time. So in retrospect, I would have to say that was my favorite episode of the season. Fissure Quest, I think, I'm looking at IMDb, and right at the moment, now this could change because it just came out, but at the moment it's the highest rated episode of the entire show, which to me already has me saying that this will win the award for most overrated episode. I mean, it's got cameos, yes, and don't get me wrong, I love those cameos. I loved seeing Ensign Kim and everyone's T'Pol was totally unexpected. That was a shock. And of course the Garrick Bashir, or what are they calling it? Gershir? Like, I'm just as pleased with that as everyone else is. But you gotta judge an episode on the story itself. You can't, just because it has cameos, you can't automatically say it's good or automatically say it sucks, for those naysayers out there who really hate cameos and Easter eggs, would automatically say that this episode sucks and it's the worst episode. Either way, you got to judge it on its own merits. And on its own merits, it was a solid episode. We finally got to follow up with William Boimler, which was a hanging Chad from earlier seasons, so that's great. But it's just the stuff with the Kims, the Lieutenant Kim turning evil because none of the other Kims got promoted. That was silly. And not in a good way. Not in a good Lower Decks silly, but in a bad writing, kind of dumb silly. It's just, and yeah, when they had Lily from First Contact, I'm like, okay, that's just too much. Now you're just going overboard with the cameos. Like that was just I don't know. That cameo didn't sit right with me. It didn't really make sense in terms of the timeline, but I guess you could say time is relative between the parallel universes. But that just seems like a big old excuse, in my opinion. It's just, and well, there's the Paul thing. Now, the Paul I will excuse for one cameo, because that's a great cameo, and it would be great. I personally, would have rather seen her on Stranger Worlds as an older DePaul, but you know, we get what we can get. It was still a great cameo, so I'll excuse DePaul. But when they brought in Lily, I'm just like, no. That's too much. So, it's a good episode. Don't get me wrong. I gave it a 9 out of 10, so I stand by that 9 out of 10. I still think it was a solid, but I wouldn't call it like, it might make my top 10 of Lower Decks, which I'm not going to do anytime soon. I'm going to have to wait till I do a rewatch. It's going to be a couple years before I do a full rewatch. But, yeah, so maybe it will make a top 10, but it's definitely not top 5, and definitely not the best episode of the entire show. So it's already looking like the most overrated. Well, cameo episodes tend to be the most overrated. And yeah, I already talked about the finale. It was strong. It didn't really feel like a series finale until the last couple scenes, but the last couple scenes were a perfect send-off to the show. Had me in tears. Fucking loved it. But the episode itself was a good send-off to the season, though. It probably does what one of the better season finales, I will say. It does what it wraps up, brings back all the characters and wraps them up. But the Klingon storyline did feel a little bit tacked on. And that's another thing that I wanted to say about the season as a whole, is that I don't think it did as good of a job with wrapping up or keeping the consistent storyline going. Like season 4, for example, I think did a much better job. And the ships disappearing, like they touched on it pretty much every episode, and I was interested. It was a mystery. I'm like, ooh, I was totally invested, like what's going on. And as the mystery unfolded, we get more and more pieces of the puzzle until the penultimate episode when it was all revealed, and you had that big shocking reveal as Nick Lucano. I was like, ugh. So it was built up really nicely and then paid off great in the final episode. Whereas this one, I kind of forgot about the ongoing storyline this season. I mean, they did open up the season with it, so that was a good opener to the season that had the Cerritos meet a parallel Cerrito. So that was a good way to kick off this storyline about different fissures from parallel universes. But then after that, they kind of it was just in the background, and the characters. See, here's the thing. This is what I've learned when I've taken writing classes or stuff. You only care about, it doesn't matter how dire the crisis is or the situation is, you only care about it as much as the characters care about it. Like, the example that was given to me is that if you have a movie where the world's about to end and so, monsters about to kill everyone and destroy the entire world, and compare that to a movie where someone's in high school and they want to get a date to the prom, and are they going to get the date? The level to which the audience is invested is not dependent on how high the stakes are, because clearly the stakes are much higher and the world's going to end movie. But the audience could theoretically be a lot more invested in a high school movie about whether or not this boy gets a date to a prom, depending on how much the characters are invested. Like, how much are you invested in the characters, how much do you love the characters, and how much are the characters themselves invested? And I kind of felt like the characters didn't really give a shit about the whole parallel. They were just being nonchalant about it and making jokes. Now, granted, Lower Decks does that a lot, and that was part of the humor, and usually it is really funny about the nonchalant, crazy Star Trek stuff that goes on, because it makes, is mocking the fact that all this crazy shenanigans goes on in Star Trek all the time. But you can't really do that as far as if you're trying to set up an ongoing storyline to get us invested in. Like last season 4, for example, like the characters were invested. They were worried about the ships. They were scared. They were this is a big deal. What's going on? Where this time it's just like, oh yeah, it's another fissure. God damn it. Oh yeah, just close it up again. Oh, and by the way, there was a purple Enterprise that went through. It was just very nonchalant about it. So I was not nearly as invested in the ongoing storyline. So I will say, as a through storyline, as a season, it was trying to do the same thing season 4 did, but because previous seasons didn't really have that through storyline the entire season. Season 4, I believe, was the first one that really did that. I mean, there would be a couple of threads here and there that would be interwoven between each season, but season 4 is really one that had that ongoing thing, and this season didn't pull it off. It didn't. I was not interested, and so I was less interested in the finale. When we got to the finale and they finally solved it, again, it seemed like kind of a B plot. Like they just introduced some Klingon thing. Well, they didn't introduce it; it was an ongoing thing, but it really wasn't. Like, we didn't know who this character, this evil Klingon. Like, she just came out of nowhere. Oh, it's the sister of the other guy that he killed earlier this season, and also the other guy who died back in season 2. Like, and it just popped up in this episode, and so it felt like kind of I said this in my review for that episode, kind of an aside, kind of just like they needed to tack on another storyline in order to create more tension because there wasn't enough interest in closing this rift. And so yeah, so I gotta look at the through season of the entire through story through the entire season as a failure. I don't think it worked. Now, that being said, I talked in season 4 about how I didn't like the cliffhanger with Tendi. I don't like her background as a pirate princess or whatever. I think that's, I don't know, to me that kind of betrays her character a bit. And so I'm glad that the season just got that storyline done, and by episode 2, like, we're done with it. We never touch on it again. I was very happy with that. And as for the storyline itself, wasn't the worst thing in the world, because they had the making fun of the the blue Orions from the animated series. I gotta admit, I love that gag. And then we had an episode wrapping up Jennifer and Mariner's relationship. It kind of addressed that in a meta way, which I think was very clever. But again, that episode was just kind of, it was all right. I wouldn't call it like a masterpiece or anything. And then we met the Klingon Ma'a again, and his brother, which again, that was a fun episode. Great, nothing wrong with that. And then we get Starbase 80, which I never liked the idea of Starbase 80. I thought that was a dumb gag that actually doesn't fit in Star Trek ethos, shall we say. And the cliches that they had in this episode where it turned out Starbase 80 was actually fine and there was nothing wrong with them. Like, that was obvious. That was really cliche. But it was still, like, you had some funny moments in the episode. Some great character moments. So, yeah, it was still a decent episode. And then the one that had the little balls and the squares, like, that was kind of funny. A lot of jokes falling around with that. But I don't know. And introducing the character of Ensign Ali, who is an interesting concept, but it does seem a bit odd to introduce a character this late in the show. Again, very clearly they didn't know the show was about to end. And as I said, the fully dilated episode is my favorite of the season. This Mariner trying to do the inner light. Oh, I need to have an inner light family and doing the flute. Yeah, that was hilarious. But the through character with Tendi and Talen competing for the same position, being stuck on a planet, and having the call out to Voyager's blink of an eye, like all that, like, so yeah, that was to me the high point of the season. Upper Decks, to me, this is the episode that, at the very least, they should have moved. Like, when they heard that the show was coming to an end, they should have swapped Fully Dilated and Upper Decks, so that Fully Dilated came right before Fissure Quest. So if you have to have Fissure Quest in there, it's fine. That doesn't have our main characters, but that's excusable. But to have 2 episodes in a row that doesn't focus on our main characters is inexcusable. And honestly, I don't think we needed Upper Decks at all. It was a decent episode. I mean, it was funny. There was definitely parts of it I liked. Like the whole Ensign Barnes de-evolving and evolving at the same time. And Billups' storyline and Ta'ana's storylines were both off-the-wall bonkers, just hilarious. And the Ransom storyline was really dumb, where he's just like, goofing off and being like, oh, I'm going to make the Lower Deckers hate me and unite in hating me. Like, that was just a really stupid storyline. And, I just don't think we needed that episode at all. Like, it's supposed to be, we're just a gag, like TNG did the Lower Decks episode, so we're a Lower Decks show, we're gonna do the Upper Decks episode to focus on the senior officers. It feels like this is an episode that should have happened in season 2 or season 3. It seems like by the time you get up to season 5, we actually know all the senior officers pretty well by this stage, so it doesn't feel like, we're focusing on these characters we never focus on, but we do. We've had episodes about Freeman and Ransom. Now, granted, then we don't focus on them as much, but again, this should have been a season 1 or season 2 episode, I think. I think by the time you get to season 5, you don't need this episode, and I really don't. I mean, I don't think it was a terrible episode. All right, and I already talked about Fissure Quest and the new Next Generation. Both really good episodes. I don't think I have a least favorite episode of the season. As I said, they were all kind of fine. They were all like good to one degree or another. I guess again, I'd probably have to rewatch the season to be sure, but maybe episode 2, Shades of Green, because I'm not a big fan of the Orion stuff. I mean, it was okay, and either that or the Starbase 80, which that was kind of cliche. I don't know. So most of the episodes sit around a 7 or an 8. I think the last Fully Dilated, Fissure Quest, and New Next Generation are probably the only 3 that go above that to like a 9 or a 10. But so my rating for Lower Decks season 5 as a whole, I'm gonna give this an 8. I was thinking of giving it a 7, but I gotta give it a benefit of the doubt of being the final season. And it did have a lot of great cameos and a lot of funny moments, and there were no terrible episodes, so that's a huge plus. So I will err on the higher side and give this episode an 8 out of 10. So that's it for my review of Lower Decks. So that is it. As I said, this will be it until a couple years from now, maybe, when I go revisit the show. As I said, very sad to see it go. I do believe, kind of in retrospect, the more I'm thinking about it, this is my favorite modern Trek show, even more so than Strange New Worlds. I think Strange New Worlds needs to prove itself in Season 3, because I thought Season 2 was a bit of a downgrade, and I think Lower Decks has been more consistent. But we'll see. We'll see. It could always change, but as it stands, I think Lower Decks is my favorite show in the modern era of Star Trek, so it does suck to see it go, for sure. Anyway, so if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my channel as I continue to cover Star Trek. I'm covering Star Trek Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time at the moment. Just about ready to wrap up TNG pretty soon, getting towards the end of the show, of that show as well. So you can check out my channel for all that and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.